Having been brought up in Wimbledon, I spent so much of my life driving through that area, driving past that ground that then turned into flats, and just that dream of one day having your own home. And the kind of crazy thing about Plough Lane is it's been this kind of like dream oasis that we've thought about.
A lot of firsts happened at Plough Lane, and it was a mystical and magical place for me. And you only realise how important that is once it's been taken away.
Much as we loved it, much as it was unique and created a special feeling and made us feel like a special club, it was equally a blessing and a curse. There's a moment where you think, my club has just disappeared. It's gone.
It was slowly dying a death, and really the only thing that was going to kind of bring Wimbledon back as a football club was a return to Wimbledon. I lived really close to Plough Lane growing up. I could actually see from the top of our house the away end, and that feeling of walking down Gap Road towards the stadium and seeing the kind of like the floodlights. And when you're young, everything just feels so big. You could feel, crowd was building up and the excitement and the noise. When the big teams used to come, in particular Liverpool, Man United, hour before kick-off, the away end would be packed, there'd be people climbing up floodlights. Even as a 10-year-old, I can sort of look back 30 years on and kind of like see and feel those emotions as you walk through that really tight turnstile. And there was like a burger van underneath the stand, and then you turn right. There was a guy actually who used to sell wagon wheels and calypsos on a wooden bench, and then you walked up to your seat. And those memories are incredibly vivid. If you ask me to remember anything else from when I was 10 years old, I couldn't remember anything, but I can remember those feelings of going to Plough Lane.
I think the first season that I went regularly was 87, 88. The best moments of that first season were the big games at Plough Lane. We beat Arsenal at Christmas, we beat Tottenham, we drew with Liverpool, who were absolutely unstoppable. All those moments added to the fact that for me it was a special place, a place that opposition fans and players didn't really like coming to. They found it uncomfortable and awkward. The intimacy was really something special. It felt like you were leaning into the pitch. I remember my dad behind me, and it felt as if he was almost like holding me from falling onto the field when like Manchester United or Everton players were like taking throw-ins. So when I was like 12, 13, 14, we'd even get into Plough Lane to play because they never locked it. You'd just like lift the bolt on the main gate, just walk in, and then go up the stairs, down the back of the West Bank, the home terrace, and onto the pitch. That was amazing. I mean, it's absolutely something impossible to imagine now that you could let yourself into a top flight team's ground with your mates and play on the pitch where most weeks your favourite players did.
Obviously, we got Vinny here with the FA Cup, and then Vinny with some other kind of trophy just down there. You can see that, nice and small. But no, I'm saying it's a small photo, not that, anyway. So, yeah, Vinny grabbing. Well, it used to represent my childhood and everything good about my growing up. My mischief, my fun, one of my first girlfriends, my first hot dog. Never felt the same since I had that. A lot of firsts happened at Plough Lane, and it was a mystical and magical place for me.
I think if you asked probably 9 out of 10 football fans who'd been there, they would say, what a dump. But the fact that it was so rudimentary compared to other grounds, it was a badge of honour, really. It showed what had happened with Wimbledon. The fact that we'd come up the leagues so quickly, we'd come from old 4th division to old 1st division in the space of 5 years, a phenomenal achievement. What the team had done on the pitch had far outstripped the speed with which the infrastructure of the club could keep up.
The whole Wimbledon story started when we beat Bath City, in my opinion. That was in the first round of the FA Cup, 92nd minute rocket. You know, it was the only game on in London that day. All the other games had been called off. There's a massive crowd. Everyone went berserk. I'd never seen anything like it. I was only 11 years old and people were getting flung about all over the place. It was utterly bonkers. We beat Forest down there when they were European champions. We knocked them out of the League Cup with Brian Clough and all of that. The first time we beat Man United, Vinny scored on his home debut. And that was a special day because it was just like we've just beaten Manchester United. So there were a lot of firsts and a lot of things that happened there that were totally incredible. But surely the most incredible thing to come out of Plough Lane really was when we won that FA Cup.
That Liverpool team was, Man United, Real Madrid, Juventus all rolled into one. They were the biggest team in the world and they had the biggest support. They were winning everything. They were coming to Wembley that day to win the double and it was kind of like a foregone conclusion. We were in non-league like 10, 12 years earlier and then to win the FA Cup final against Liverpool in a game that had a penalty save and it was against the biggest team in the country at the time. It was so iconic.
So winning the FA Cup had its side effects, obviously. All of a sudden, I think there was an understanding and acceptance that Wimbledon had good players and those players started to get picked off. I remember of Dave Besant leaving straight after saving that penalty in the FA Cup final to Newcastle United. At that point you realised that those growing pains weren't going to go away really, and those growing pains which the stadium was a huge part of. Ever since we'd been in the top flight, the ground was casting a shadow because Sam Hammam, the owner, was adamant that it was losing us money hand over fist and it was holding us back. Plough Lane was holding us back. It was stopping us holding on to players, etc, etc. There'd been really strong speculation in the first season in the top flight in 86-87 about not just a move but a potential merger with Crystal Palace or Queen's Park Rangers. In the 86-87 FA Cup fifth round where we played Everton and we beat them 3-1 at Plough Lane. What I remember more than our current manager, Glyn Hodges, scoring and Fashanu scoring and Andy Sayer scoring was when Everton were attacking during the first half and there was this little lull and then you could just hear the swell from the West Bank and fans chanting, "We'll never go to Palace."
And the referee is taking the players off the field. So this FA Cup semi-final has been interrupted after 6 minutes because of crowd problems here. Capacity at Hillsborough.
There, George, behind the goals, the crowd looked as if they were pushing forward and they were getting crushed near the front.
It's quite obvious there that some of those fans have been injured. It's a situation, of course, fraught with danger. Crowds are corralled these days in football stadia, and if there is any pressure on from the crowd behind. There simply is nowhere for those nowhere to go.
In '89, of course, there was the Hillsborough tragedy, and that changed English football forever. The way the Taylor Report changed English football was good, certainly, because it meant that fans were treated with a bit more care, a bit more respect, and it became an emergency that had to be dealt with in English football and should have been dealt with a long time before.
What it actually made me think about is the times I've been at football and been crushed and felt unsafe, which had happened quite a few times for lots of different reasons. It's a miracle it didn't happen before what happened with Hillsborough, in my opinion. It was amazing, really. A diabolical thing to happen. And yeah, pretty quickly, people started saying, well, they're going to bring in all-seater stadiums and that is the end of Plough Lane.
In terms of Wimbledon, that was really the reason that the club needed, a good reason that the club needed to get Wimbledon out of Plough Lane. Because if you all-seated Plough Lane in its format as was, it would have gone down from 18,000 to about 7,500 if it was all-seater, which would have made the revenues of the club, I guess, fall even further. So in spring '91, season ticket holders received a note from the club saying we're going to be sharing at Selhurst Park from next season. It all felt like it happened pretty suddenly. It was difficult to get your head around. And then we played that last game at the old Plough Lane in May 1991. At the end of that game, everyone came onto the pitch, and some people grabbed a bit of turf or a few other little bits, but I think really people were on the pitch looking for something, and they didn't know what, whether it was like solace in each other, whether it was a sense of where do we go, what do we do now.
It was just horrendous to think that I wouldn't be going to watch my team at our home ground again, and I felt that I knew then that we would never play at that ground ever again.
So when we arrived at Selhurst Park, it was sold to us as a lot of things, as temporary.
It was kind of quite a drawn-out process. I think it was like a decade that we stayed at Selhurst for, but that was the beginning of the end for Wimbledon because it just wasn't our ground. Everything at the ground was the colours of Crystal Palace. You were definitely in a different part of London, nowhere near Wimbledon. So it just felt like an away game, like every single match of the season. For me, it just never felt like home.
When Wimbledon moved to Selhurst Park, I would actually get in my car, I'd get to the end of the road, see the old ground, turn around and go home because I just couldn't face driving past the old ground. I felt all along that it was more about money than it was about the Taylor Report.
During that period, there were just fans that had had enough and they just didn't want to do that travelling anymore, go to a soulless ground. The atmosphere was good when we played the big teams, but it was only good because the away fans made it. For Wimbledon fans, it was just, it was a pretty soulless place to watch football, really.
We're tribal. We want to follow our tribe where we come from, not anywhere else, so I found that very difficult. Eventually I went back, but it never felt like home there. Not once, not for 1 minute. So we always longed.
You had the midweek games, particularly at the beginning of that period at Selhurst, before the Premier League had really taken off. You had games where we'd get 3,500 for a midweeker against Everton or Coventry. And in a ground of that size, which wasn't our own, it was quite a depressing experience. And of course, Selhurst Park, as we now know, is the place where Wimbledon FC was started to die.
Once Wimbledon got relegated from the Premier League, slowly but surely, like, you know, the ownership had changed. It was very clear that there was talk about moving the club, and if supporting Wimbledon at home could get any more depressing, it kind of did week in, week out, and there was more talk about going to Bedfordshire, and you know, there was before that, it was talk about going to Dublin, and apparently that was quite close to happening.
The way things happened was at the start of the 2001-2002 season, a brochure came out, and the headline on the brochure was a unique solution. And it was the proposal to move Wimbledon to Milton Keynes. Now, we'd already had all the rumours and things had been put to the league and rejected and so on and so on, but you knew then these guys were serious. It was a proper kind of business case that they'd put in, although, you know, completely flawed, and in point of fact, if you looked at that again now and said, well, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, it's all a load of old rubbish. It was all, basically, it was around a property deal. So the anger, when that came through, was palpable. And then we spent the whole season fighting them. And we fought a good fight.
I can't really remember any of the football that season. It was just black balloons, fan-made programmes, because no one wanted to buy the official programmes. That's when the fans realised that the club was moving in a different direction to us. And when the fans mobilised, organised, there was a sense of, right, Wimbledon supporters are ready to fight this. And that's what happened.
It never got violent. It got close a couple of times. It never got violent. We did everything with dignity, you know. But we were inventive with what we did. You know, with planes flying over live games with banners hanging off them, and, you know, loads of T-shirts printed, and you know, we made a noise, and we found out where the board was meeting up in London and raided their board meeting. They didn't like that very much, I can tell you. That was a brilliant day. We put the wind up them, but we put the wind up them the right way. We launched the Don's Trust, and thank God we did that, because it brought everybody together. And then that fateful decision happened, and that was it.
The actual confirmation of the move itself, when the three-man appeal panel sent that through in May 2002, that was the lowest point, because there's a moment where you think, my club has just disappeared. It's gone. Our former owner, Sam Hammam, sold the club lock stock in '98 to Rocker and Gelston, the Norwegian billionaires. This was a guy who had moved us from Plough Lane. He'd not created any meaningful relation with Milton Council to look for an alternative ground in or near Wimbledon. He'd sold the site of the old Plough Lane to Safeway, having removed the sporting covenant to it. They didn't get planning permission for it in the end, so it was sold on to property developers, and then the old Plough Lane was turned into flats. It was clear that successive owners of the club just never really got it. They never really got what football was about, football supporting was about, completely overlooking and not understanding that where a club is, the way it connects with its community, it's not really about money, it's about a sense of belonging. They never really understood what our club meant to us and how far we would go to hang on.
From the minute that decision was made, it was done for me. There was only one thing for the future then, that was Wimbledon's new football club. That's what it was going to be, end of story, nothing else. No other route, no more fighting, no more boycotting games, boycotting shops, boycotting anything. It was now, let's start again and show them what we can really do.
Last year of Wimbledon FC, as we saw it, proved that we could do stuff like come together for a common cause. And that's where the relationships were created between supporters that allowed us to move so quickly after the decision to move Wimbledon FC to Milton Keynes was sanctioned.
Pretty much overnight there was talk of AFC Wimbledon and the team launching, and it kind of like, at first to me personally, it felt like this is absurd. You can't just support a football. Like, football teams have been going for like 100 years. You can't relaunch a football team. Like, how does that happen? Like, you know, what do you do? Do you start playing pub teams first?
The first thing that happened, we were recommended to speak to the London FA. So we spoke to a guy called David Folkes, who was absolutely pivotal in our existence. He got us a form over. When he came in to see us, he had to finish the form off. And the two key questions, the first one was the name of the club. I said, what about AFC? You know, AFC Wimbledon. And he went, yep. I said, what, as simple as that? And he's like, yep. And you could hear it, you know, we were making up the chants before the ink was dry. And then he came out with the other thing, and this is probably the single most important part of our formation, which for me gave me massive drive and belief in what we were doing. He said, date formed, and we just said 1889. And that's when Wimbledon Football Club started. And he said, right, 1889, and he put 1889 down on the form. So our registration form with the London FA says that we started in 1889. That takes all the arguments away of what club we are and who we are and all the rest of it. Yeah, we are Wimbledon, and that's end of story for me.
It was just great to have a football team again. Like, if I look back on, you know, AFC Wimbledon, what does it mean to me? It means that I still have a football team, because I could never have supported Fulham, Chelsea and Arsenal, really. I think, like, in terms of that love, that I would have maybe followed them and gone to games as a customer, but to be in love and have that connection that, you know, all football fans have, and that real kind of, you know, my dad took me to watch Wimbledon West Ham, you know, when I was 6 years old. That's my football team. That I just felt like that had gone. And so when AFC Wimbledon launched, to me it was like, okay, I've still got a football team, and thanks. I don't know what's going to happen next, but we'll enjoy it and we'll see where that journey takes us. It just grew momentum, and then before you knew it, we were at Sutton United playing our first ever match. I think 4,500 people turned up, and we'd sold out their ground, and there was a lot of people locked up outside.
They ran out of toilet rolls, they ran out of beer, they ran out of Twix, crisps, everything was gone. It was utter carnage on the evening. It was brilliant. I had to put the kick-off back twice at least. I think it might even have been 3 times. We let off a load of balloons. We had a big flag printed. We announced Sports Interactive, you know, Football Manager, as our sponsors that night. You know, and that was I can guarantee you that's the biggest sponsorship there's ever been in the Combined Counties League. We lost 4-0. We didn't have our own kit that night. You know, we'd had a trial on Wimbledon Common a couple of weeks before.
It was all happening so fast, but people, and a lot of people, were ready to respond to it because they saw and felt a revival of the Wimbledon spirit, really.
To me, it's kind of like instantly felt like, there's a football team here. This can continue, this journey and this dream, we can go forward. My expectations were really, really low, and there was talk about, we can get back to being in the Championship and so forth.
It was totally stunning. We knew there was something very special happening that night. We just knew it.
that journey through non-league, like when you look back on it, there's just like so many iconic moments of restarting again and going back kind of like to the Wimbledon of the 60s and the 70s that were, you know, a great non-league team. So I was like, this will always be my football team, and it will be similar to kind of like, you know, I'll just support a non-league team, that's cool, I'm happy with that. Slowly but surely it gained momentum, and, you know, it was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm believing.
Everyone had their AFC Wimbledon epiphany moment at a different point. Always the most precious moment for me will always be Kevin Cooper's equaliser against Chipstead in that first home game in the Combined Counties League. There was no delay, what do we do? The ball hit the net and it just jumped up. There was no little grace period of what does this mean? I knew what it meant. It was my team scoring a goal, and to know that my club was still alive in a different form, in a new form, in a better form, that was an incredible feeling. And for me, that surpasses any of those moments like getting back in the league in 2011 when we were promoted in Manchester in that penalty shootout against Luton, that a right had been wronged. We had got our league place that belonged to us as a club back. It meant more than the 2016 promotion to League One, which was a lovely surprise, but it's not something that was part of the grand plan. None of those moments for me will ever match that Kevin Cooper goal. You know, there have been moments of greater skill, maybe in greater sporting significance, but that was the moment when we realised that our club was alive and AFC Wimbledon was it.
To start a football team in the 9th tier of, you know, the pyramid and get back into professional football in 9 years, I mean, it's remarkable, and I would be very, very surprised if it's ever done again.
After that Sutton game, we went on this magic carpet ride that took us up and up and up and up and up, and there's loads of individual stories in between, but all roads, once we got ourselves fully established, led back to Plough Lane. Having been homeless as such for 30 years, although we had a very good temporary home for the last 18 at Kings Meadow, is just soul-destroying.
So going home to Plough Lane was always the dream. But for me, it always did seem like a dream. So many years at Selhurst, never-ending years it seemed, it appeared to make that impossible. And I know there were people involved with the club who always had Plough Lane as the end game. I've got to be honest, I didn't think it was possible. I was very conscious of the costs involved in running a club and that every penny counted, and we've always known that.
When we ran out of money to fund the ground, you know, kind of this time last year, it became public. A group of lads got together and said, we're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let the club sell too many shares to outside influencers. We're going to raise the money that we need, and they set up the Plough Lane bond. And that raised 5.4 million.
And you know, you always wondered in the back of your mind if the dog track was possible, if that was the venue that would work. But once there was even a glimmer, I wanted to be all in. And just going home is the full reclaiming of the club. it could only be there. It could only be Plough Lane, both emotionally and intellectually.
Returning to Plough Lane is the ultimate achievement. Like, you know, if you offered me Wimbledon to win the Premier League or return to Plough Lane, like, it's not even a close call. Like, returning to Plough Lane is everything to this football club. The work that's gone in to make that a reality is just unbelievable, and we're just so thankful to everyone, and that you can share that with your family and friends and have that experience of going to watch football again in Wimbledon.
The feeling of absolute elation that we're back there is totally incredible. It's a very, very powerful thing, not just for me, but for absolutely everyone in Wimbledon, the whole community, because they all benefit out of this football club and we benefit out of them. The one thing that you know from this experience is that every football fan deserves a home. Everyone should be at home. Home is a special, special place, no matter how big, how small, how out of shape it might be, how run down it might be, how bad the toilets are. Your home is your home, and nothing should ever take a club away from its home again.